So this morning we are going to spend the next half an hour discussing about privacy and security in the cloud. I got a bit of understanding that in this room there's not going to be much of a technical knowledge, so I will try to scale down the presentation, so avoiding technical terms. If there is anything that you don't understand, don't be afraid, raise your hand, I will try to give you an explanation. I tend to speak very fast. So again, if there is something you are not getting, again, let me know. Daniele Catteddu, CTO at Cloud Security Alliance. Presentation today is going to be pretty much structured in 3 parts. I'm going to give you an overview of what Cloud Security Alliance is. I will give you then a brief overview of the state of the art, where are we, and then where we are going. And then I will provide you with a number of recommendations for possible solutions. So Cloud Security Alliance is a not-for-profit organization. We are about 10 years old, so not really a baby, but a little boy or little girl growing pretty fast. By now, we are the largest information security association worldwide. We got 85,000, actually over 85,000 individual members, over 300 corporate members, which are like other cloud service provider or security vendors, or a large organization using cloud services. We have been focusing on a number of things. Mainly, we have been promoting the idea of agile implementation of applied research. We have been preaching the verb of a balanced adoption of cloud. So having in mind all the risks that are there, not to be found unprepared whenever you are implementing your cloud solution. What we do is pretty simple. We do mainly research. We got about 34 working groups active so far. So the way we work is pretty simple. We create a research charter, and then we have a call for volunteers who are participating in our activities. The idea of the organization is to put together smart people to work together, smart people from different backgrounds and different companies. So we got in the same working group Google and Microsoft, or Google and AWS. So there are competitors between them. And then the result of what we do is provided free of charge to the community. So in our idea, there is a need for better education, for better knowledge around cloud security, and therefore about 99% of what we do is available free of charge to anyone. We have been giving an advice to governments, to private companies. We focus a lot also on provider certification, training, and standards. So we are not per se a standard development organization. We are more of a standard incubator, which means that whatever piece of research that we produce and become mature enough, then it moved to the next level. So for instance, we got a liaison with ISO. I'm sure you're familiar with ISO. And we transfer our knowledge there and we participate in the creation of standards. We do organize every now and then events, which are very much a way for us to be in touch with our community. So what are the problems we are facing? I guess that everybody has realized that in the last few years we have seen a massive growth in terms of cyber attacks. If I compare the situation to 15 years ago when I started my career in information security, that's a big difference. Back then, the situation was that there were some script kiddies, some smart people trying to push the edge of knowledge and try to act mostly for fun. Some of them were doing it maliciously, but it was a small minority. Currently, we are in a situation where hackers are not part of, well, I don't like using the word hackers because it's not appropriate. But we are facing a situation of cyber criminality, which has become a real industry. And that's why, and the problem is that being an industry, being very well organized, they have a lot of resources. The second important point to make is that that's no limit to human stupidity, unfortunately. And a number of bad habits that has been there for the past 20 years are still here today. Those are two key examples. So I think you remember the accident with the leaking of information from iCloud. So the basic issue there was the use of very weak password. The other one is an example of Deloitte. The day before yesterday, there's been a massive, it surfaced that Deloitte had a pretty large security breach, which means that a number of information related to their customer were leaked. The problem was that someone got to get an admin account, which basically means that if you are the king of the kingdom at that point, because you have access to any kind of information. And the reason why it happened is because that account was not protected by a double-factor authentication. Now, I'm assuming that everyone in this room is using double-factor authentication, right? Huh? Are you? Well, if you're not, you should. And then there is this guy. Now, this person represents for many people different things. To me, it represents simply something, which is that no matter how big of an organization you are, how large is your information security budget, there will be always a way for someone to leak information outside your organization. So NSA is by far the organization with the largest information security budget worldwide. Nevertheless, they were not able to keep a secret. So have this in mind. So there will be no organization that is going to be able to keep secrets. So be prepared for a security breach. And that brings me to what are to be considered, or at least are considered from our point of view, the top security threats in the cloud. So this is the result of a publication that we do pretty much every 2 years. We are now going to move to an annual basis, which is a collection of information about, from expert and security practitioners on what they think are the most relevant security breaches out there. So first one, top of the list is certainly data breaches. Second one is compromise of credential insecure API. You can read the paper on your own. I don't need to drive you through it. I'll just give you a few examples. So this is the example of Yahoo. Over 1 billion accounts leaked. That's a lot of information. So in that breach, I can read a number of different things. First of all, that again, most of the organization, unfortunately, are not prepared whenever a data breach is happening. And this is going to be even more important now with the implementation of GDPR. Now, I'm assuming that that everyone in this room is now getting prepared for the implementation of the General Data Protection Regulation. So under the new regulation, if you will be found uncompliant, and having a data breach is a good symptom of lack of compliance, you will be fined up to 4% of your annual turnover, which is a lot of money. The other point is about compromising, credential. So this is, again, a typical example of poor implementation of technology. LinkedIn was essentially encrypting our password, because I'm using LinkedIn as well, using SHA-1, which is a known flawed algorithm, rather than SHA-2, for instance. So again, it's a matter of small details. It's a matter of poor implementation of technologies in many cases. Now, this is an example which is pretty scary. So I'm pretty sure that all of you is familiar with the idea of single sign-on. So many times, whenever you're downloading an application on your phone, you get asked to log in, or in alternative, which means setting up an account, or in alternative, you will be asked to use an existing identity provider that you have. So either using Gmail as a source of your credential, or LinkedIn, or Twitter, you name it. So the idea is that your identity gets transferred through a technology which is called OAuth 2. Now, problem is that in many cases, those technologies are not implemented in a proper way. So in this case, this Chinese researcher found that almost 1 billion applications that they have been testing were having a poor implementation of this protocol. So again, here the lesson to be learned is be very careful about the application you are getting in your perimeter. Be very careful whenever you are allowing in your corporate environment applications that are not tested. Well, Manitional Insider is obviously another big issue, and as well as the idea of shared technologies. So what cloud is very often putting on the table is the idea of collaboration. The idea that the cloud provider is essentially an extension of your data center. And therefore, I mean, that's an issue of sharing technologies. This is the problem that has been like a few months ago with Cloudflare, which is the organization that is providing almost 1/3 of the DNS for the company worldwide. Problem there has been very simple. They were parsing data. They were supposed to be a plain HTML. But rather than using just HTML for parsing those data, they were collecting data from the memory, and the data in the memory was including also, for example, encryption keys. So essentially, they were publishing online information about, encryption key of customers. So are we doomed? So are we in a situation of total loss of control? It is so that those people that were saying a few years ago, well, cloud has no future, cloud is going to be just too risky for any corporate environment, were they right? So the simple answer is no, they were not right. They were completely wrong. Cloud has been here for a few years, is going to be here for the foreseeable future, is going to be the infrastructure upon which all the new technologies like IoT, big data, artificial intelligence are going to be built on. So there will be no artificial intelligence without cloud, because we will be missing essentially the foundational piece, which is the computational power. So you need computational power in order to be able to process data. And that is going to be cloud, because no one will be able to afford computational power in such a large scale to be able to process all the data that we will be in the need of. But for sure, though, cloud needs a lot of good governance if we don't want to be in a situation of loss of control. And what we are supposed to do, certainly we are supposed to base our approach on few basic principles. Well, openness for once, transparency, sharing, and education. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, cloud is a matter of collaboration between cloud customer and cloud service provider. And in a collaboration, if we want the information to flow in a pretty efficient way, we are in the need of transparency. We are in the need of sharing information and detail between each other. And certainly, we are in the need of implementing new governance model based on new trust model. And accountability is going to be the key of it. The idea of accountability is going to be key in this process. So when it comes to governance and responsibility, it must be said the cloud is kind of changing pretty dramatically the way in which the responsibility between cloud service provider and cloud customer used to be. Typically, the responsibility are found in a contract. So whenever you are engaging with a cloud service, a potential cloud service provider, you need to go through the contract very carefully, because it is in the contract that you will find the governance mechanism and the tools that you need in order to manage your infrastructure. If something is not in the contract, well, there is a gap. There's something missing, which it doesn't mean that you cannot make business with a certain cloud service provider. It just means that whenever you are implementing your governance approach, oh gosh. Your governance approach, you need to make sure that those missing components in the contract are somehow fixed in a different way. And there is something that you should be remembering always, that an organization can never outsource responsibility for governance. The idea of cloud is the idea of someone else's problem, someone else's computer. It's not my problem anymore. That's not true. I mean, that's a certain limit of what someone else will be doing for you in the cloud. They will be taking care of some security implementation. They will be taking care of some some of the activities, but certainly the responsibility for governance is going to be yours. And when it comes to responsibility, this is more or less a representation of the allocation of responsibilities. So if you are in a situation of infrastructure as a service, then mostly the security responsibilities are on the cloud consumer. As you move up to the scale, so as you get to software as a service, then the responsibilities are mostly in the cloud service provider court. That's the way it works. So depending on the type of cloud service that you are contracting, you need to be sure that you understand which are your security responsibilities. Most of the issues that have been witnessing in terms of security problems in the cloud were stemming from a lack of understanding of what were the responsibility of the cloud customer. In many cases, there are false assumptions, for instance, about who is taking care of the backup, right? Whenever Amazon, there's been two large outages of AWS. The last one has caused a number of businesses to go bankrupt. Now, was that AWS fault? No, it was not. Because someone, as I was mentioning before, it has to assume that something might go wrong. It was simply a fault of the cloud customer that they didn't have any sort of backup solution. It didn't have a second availability zone in AWS, or it didn't have a second cloud service provider. So if you're moving to the cloud, it doesn't mean that you are not bringing with you the good approaches that you used to have in an on-prem situation. If you are managing your own data center, I'm sure that you are making sure that there is some certain level of redundancy in a way that if something happened, you got the option B in place. The same should happen in the cloud. Now, so what to do in terms of security responsibilities? So from the cloud service provider point of view, we need to expect that they are documenting their internal security controls. As I mentioned earlier, from now on, you should see your cloud provider as an extension of your data center. It's not anymore a relationship between a customer and a provider, but it's a relationship between two parties that are part of the same supply chain that are working together. And again, as I mentioned earlier on, for working together, you need to make sure that you are sharing information, that you are transparent enough. From the cloud service consumer point of view, you need to make sure that you are documenting, you have a matrix of responsibilities per each one of the services that you are contracting. You need to understand and you need to keep control of what you're responsible for. That is going to be essential, it's going to be key. Because whenever you will start having thousands of different cloud service providers, because I'm assuming a couple of infrastructure as a service provider, few platform as a service providers, and then thousands of SaaS applications. That's a typical situation in most of the corporate environments. It may be 500, but very often is in the scale of thousands of applications. So with that level of complexity and then that level of figures in terms of numbers of providers that you need to manage, it is key that you keep control in a structured way of what you are supposed to do. And then lastly, both cloud service provider and customer, they need to keep alignment with standards. That is going to be the easiest way for you to keep control, because following standards means that you are having as a foundation, as a reference, something that has been tested and approved by a large community. So this is nothing more than a high-level process for managing security in the cloud. Certainly, identifying requirements is going to be key. It was key for any on-prem IT project. It's going to be key in the cloud just as well. Now, I'm sure that each one of you in this room has been seeing a lot of IT projects failing. Now, in my experience, every time there is a failure in an IT project is because of a poor collection of initial requirements. The same would be in the cloud. So make sure you are aware of the requirements that you need to put in place. After that, well, you can go ahead and select your cloud service provider. After, you need to define which is going to be your best possible architecture, and then assess the security control within it. Identify gaps, design and implement those controls that are going to fill the gaps, and then continue to manage your information management system over time. Now, is that easy? Well, not really. So despite the simplicity of the concept of cloud, so someone else providing you IT infrastructure and computational power as a service, like an utility, cloud is bringing on the table a lot of complexity, especially from the compliance point of view. And what used to be the problem of compliance fatigue is now becoming a problem of compliance nightmare, which means that there are a number of information security requirements you need to comply with, a number of standards you need to follow, and a number of certification. So in this example, this is an example taken from Microsoft. So Microsoft is aligning to over 20 different standards, either national certification or international standards or CSA recommendations. Now, this is not certainly a situation that many companies can afford. I'm sure that, I don't know how many of you in this room have enough budget to go ahead and get 20 plus certifications, which means about 6 months to 6 to 9 months of audit every year. So that means that basically you got auditors every day in your office. Not certainly affordable from a technical point of view and from a financial point of view. Moreover, there is a sort of tension between compliance and security here. Better compliance doesn't necessarily mean better security. Compliance is a way to show to someone else that you are doing things in the proper way. Security is actually implementing technical solution to problems. So sometimes those two, they go hand in hand, sometimes they don't. But if you disproportionately increase the need of compliance, then you will have less budget to spend on security, right? Because typically they are part of the same budget. So I would like to be in a situation where compliance and security, they are not fighting anymore for the same budget, but they are working together to reach the same goal. Currently, the situation is so that in many of the organizations I'm aware of, there is a ratio 70-30 between compliance and security, being 70% the amount of money organizations spend on compliance. It seems to me that it's a kind of unnecessary, certainly not effective. So I'm going to close this presentation with a number of tools that I believe are going to be a good support for you. Those are things that we have been developing for the good of the community. Most of them are free of charge, so you can just use it. I'm going to mention from now on I'm going to make reference to the STAR program. Now, so that you know, with STAR is an acronym for Security, Transparency, and Assurance Program. So that's a program that we've been launching 6 years ago. It's essentially a certification program, structured in 3 layers, from a self-assessment to a third-party certification to a continuous monitoring. The idea is very simple. Try to provide to the market all the information that are necessary to take informed decisions. So the idea of the self-assessment is very simple. We have been developing a set of controls that goes under the name of cloud control metrics, essentially a set of information security controls targeted to cloud. Again, this is free of charge. You can go on our website and download it. The cloud control metrics, again, it's a set of cloud-specific controls that then they are mapped back to existing information security standard. For instance, how many of you knows ISO 27001? One. Right. So ISO 27001 is considered within the information security space a sort of gold standard. Everyone is making reference to it. This standard, though, it's not cloud specific. So what we did was to make sure that we were building on the top of this gold standard, to make sure that we were offering to our community a set of controls that they could use in the cloud space. We also developed a questionnaire linked to this set of controls. The idea was very simple. Try to make sure we could guide our community in asking the right questions to either their internal security team or to a cloud service provider. And the idea of this self-assessment is essentially the one of giving the opportunity to a cloud service provider to publicly share the result of this questionnaire in a way that each one of you, whenever is making, has to make an informed decision about which cloud service provider to choose, it has a number of information already collected. And you can use the same information also to compare different offerings, right? Because the idea is that you need to have an informed decision. Back to what I was saying earlier on, you need to make sure that you get enough information from your cloud service provider in order to be able to make the right decision. Based on the self-assessment, then we have developed also a third-party certification, with the idea that we wanted to offer a better level of assurance to our community so that there would be a third-party auditor to check on the statement done in the self-assessment. This StarWatch is essentially a tool based on the cloud control metrics. It's a SaaS application that you can use in order to have in a database format the information related to the security posture of your cloud service provider. And then finally, a component that we thought it was very much needed, which is called Privacy Level Agreement Code of Conduct. Again, there is a tremendous need in the market to get guidance with regard to the compliance to the General Data Protection Regulation. As you know, on the 25th of May, it's going to enter into force, and everyone has to make sure that all the necessary measures and requirements are implemented. What we are providing you, it's again a sort of checklist, if you like, with what you are supposed to do in order to make sure that you are adhering to the GDPR. That's the connection between the Privacy Level Agreement Code of Conduct and our STAR program. One of them taking care of technical compliance, the other one taking care of the legal compliance. Now, just to close very quickly with 3 recommendations. So the first one is that the problem of trust in the cloud is pretty complex. And so the recommendation is keep it simple as much as you can. The second one is that standardization is going to be key because it's a way to apply rules in a consistent way and to make and put you in the position to compare apple with apples. The FATO standard like the cloud control metrics I was referring to already exist. They are free of charge. Please do not reinvent the wheel. do not start creating your own set of controls or your own set of questions to ask. It's unnecessary, unless you have very specific requirements, which is most of the cases is not true. And then finally, try to make the internal compliance more effective. Try to reduce that balance between money that you invest in compliance and money that you invest in security. Because in this way, you're going to have a new budget, free budget, to invest where it matters, which is information security. And with that, I get finally to the end of the presentation. So if there are any questions, and if there is time, I can get a couple of them. I will be around anyway during this morning. So if you have any question, any clarification, you please let me know.